The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
And you're gonna love it.
Okay, let's go.
So anyway, man, I'm so glad to have you. And I know we've got an agenda, but before we get to that, we're going to go on to the main topic of the day. Anyway, hey, listen, everybody. Wanted to introduce Greg Stoker here. This is a guy that I've been following on Instagram probably for over a year. And honestly, you know, along with some of the other folks I've brought on, Josephine Gilbo, Alan Chaparro, some of those guys, Greg has been one of the guys that I personally look to really get a nuanced and balanced take on, you know, what's going on. A lot of his content has been directed toward Gaza. He's talked about the Ukraine-Russia stuff, but more than anything, he talks about politics and geopolitics, you know, in my opinion, from a really unique perspective. And that is his military background, because here's a guy that's been in the military and understands, you know, that aspect of it. So welcome, my man. How you doing?
Just another day in an insane news cycle. We've got Syria descending into civil war. We've got detention of green card holders for political beliefs. We've got a potential ceasefire in Russia and Ukraine that doesn't look super sustainable and looks like it could actually end up having the war go on longer. But yeah, so I'm just doing my news job, trying to keep up with everything, and it's tough.
All right, let's start with this whole, you know, Mahmoud Khalil. I haven't talked too much about that. I talked a little bit about it yesterday on the podcast, but man, give us the scoop. And I know you just got off interviewing a few folks related to Columbia University, but, you know, tell us what's going on, and then more than anything, give us your take on everything.
Yeah, so basically the bottom line is Mahmoud Khalil was a recent graduate student of Columbia University, and he was a student organizer. He was an activist, didn't have the most radical things he would say and do would be to exercise his First Amendment rights, and say things so crazy as Palestinian and Jewish liberation are intertwined. And he said that on CNN. But he was one of the big activists and organizers on campus, and he was directly targeted for his political beliefs. And one of the reasons he was targeted was because technically he's not a U.S. citizen. He's a green card holder. He's a legal resident who's married to an 8-month pregnant U.S. citizen, and they're trying to deport him back to Syria.
Yeah, that's crazy. Was he one of, I didn't even know he was a graduate student. I thought he was an undergrad. So he was a grad student, kind of one of the leaders of the protests at Columbia. But from everything I've seen, you know, that protest during last summer at Columbia and every other university, it was Jewish students, Muslim students, Christian students, Jewish faculty, Muslim faculty, Christian faculty. Like, to me, it was such a melting pot of everybody united under one thing, and that was, hey, let's stop killing innocent women and children. So they're targeting him, saying, you know, probably what, he's pro Hamas, he's pro, yes, you know, destruction. What is it?
Oh, no, he's pro Hamas. He's a terrorist sympathizer. One thing that's interesting, and you have to keep in mind, he hasn't been charged with a crime. They didn't issue a warrant for his arrest. And not only did they not have a warrant, he wasn't charged, still isn't charged. He has not had access to an attorney. The ICE agents literally wrapped him up when he was walking back from iftar dinner with his wife, which is like a Ramadan thing. And they disappeared him. No one knew where he was. His attorneys called the ICE office asking for a warrant. They got hung up on, because I talked to one of them from their attorney's office. And 2 days later, he appears in the ICE system, and he's in detention at LaSalle Detention Facility in Louisiana, from New York to Louisiana. So a lot of people, First Amendment rights folks, who are concerned about this, about the weaponizing of customs enforcement to punish people for their political speech. Again, no crime was committed, didn't say anything about Hamas, but even if he did, that's protected speech. You know, you're totally able to praise Al Qaeda or say every child in Gaza should die. You can say that. I mean, I wouldn't do either of those things, but you can do that. And one of the main concerns here, and a lot of the propaganda supporting this weaponization of customs and borders, like this main propaganda point is like, he's not a US citizen. The Constitution doesn't apply to him. It absolutely does. The Constitution applies to every single human being on the United States, whether or not you're a tourist, whether or not you're here illegally or legally. The Constitution applies to you. This is kind of what the Trump administration is doing. They are doing a systems test to see what they can get away with. I don't think they actually think they can deport him, but they want to set a precedent and an element of fear and a slow chipping, multi-generational chipping away at the Constitution and the freedom of speech and to politically organize and gather.
Yeah, I honestly, I think what is insane to me is him and his administration right now. For 4 years, they were basically saying the Biden administration was weaponizing everything against them and against free speech and against all of that. And they're literally doing that exact same thing right now. That's pretty ridiculous. Why do you think they targeted this guy? Like, was he that high profile or why him?
I mean, he wasn't high profile on the international level or the national level even.
Yeah.
Like nobody outside of like the New York protest circles even knew who he was.
Okay.
No, they were just trying to make an example out of him. He was an organizer and he happened to not completely be a US citizen yet. So
Got it.
That's why they picked him.
You know what? You're right. It was probably because he's got a green card, and then this gives, if not a precedent to go after folks with a green card, at least it puts the fear of God into anyone who has a green card and who wants to kind of, exercise their First Amendment rights. That's crazy. That's ridiculous.
Well, and now the main concern is, they'll do some Nazi stuff where, even if you're a naturalized citizen and you went through a naturalization process, they can denaturalize you and then deport you.
Jesus Christ. Were you at any of those college protests last summer? Did you go to any of those?
Yeah, I was there at UT, and UT got friggin', it was brutal.
Wow. Do you know Elijah Kallenberg?
No, I don't.
Elijah, he's a Jewish student at UT that was one of the organizers of all that. I've had him on the podcast a couple times. He got a lot of coverage because, again, he's very pro-Palestinian, pro-Jewish, anti-Zionist in terms of, wanting to bring those two worlds together and not allowing Zionism to trump the religious aspect of Judaism. He goes to Texas. I'll have to connect you guys. You'd have a great conversation with him. All right, well, shit, man. What do you think's going to happen with this kid? Do you think they're going to be able to deport him, or this is just going to end up where they won't?
See, nobody knows. This is probably going to go all the way to the Supreme Court based off the lawyers I've talked to. So the New York judge ordered a freeze on the deportation. Both legal teams, Trump's legal team and Mahmoud's legal team, are submitting their written arguments on Friday. And this is going to take forever. It's still a legal process, and the judge wrote himself, like, this is concerning. This happened very fast. We need to slow down and see what happens. So this is going to be an ongoing story. And one thing I want to stress for people that, if everyone in America, Europe, Australia, every other West associated country needs to be deeply concerned and engaged in actual action over this, because governments learn from each other. Right? They watch each other to see what they can get away with. So if they're able to disappear people in America, which has really strong constitutional protections, probably the most in terms of personal liberty that exists on the planet, it will embolden like all the fascist and pro-tyranny people throughout Europe and in other parts of the world as well. So yeah, coming to a local police department near you. And I tried to on my podcast, which is called Colonial Outcasts, kind of try to explain to like white people, who generally don't worry about this, like, it's coming for you. It's going to start with like the most marginalized people, green card holders from Syria. And then, that's why we have like Elbit systems and Israeli spy tech around Native American reservations. And then it's slowly going to work its way up and up and up the ladder until everyone who disagrees with the government is just going to be an enemy of the state. And, we like to say that the road to fascism and tyranny is painted by is paved by people telling you that you're overreacting. So we do want to take this seriously.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. All right, let's get into the serious stuff because I'd love your take on that. You know, what do you think that's all about? And a month ago or 2 months ago, when Bashar al-Assad gets, all of a sudden overthrown, what felt like overnight, because I think it practically was overnight. What's
3 days.
going on? Yeah, 3 days.
Well, Syria is like probably the most complicated battle space on the planet. There's a ton of different factions. There's a ton of history. Basically, in the late 2010s, there was some popular uprising against Assad's brutal, corrupt, crony regime. He was a dictator, and he was brutal, and he cracked down on it. There was a massive unifying popular uprising in the 2010s. Then what happened was, because Iraq was so destabilized, Al-Qaeda was all over Iraq, then the Islamic State got formed, and all these extremist elements started to go into the battle space. Syria was almost completely engulfed by the Islamic State. And so all these minority groups who weren't Sunni Salafi jihadists ended up supporting the government that they were fighting, because the government was the only one, and the Russians were the only one that could protect them from Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. So anyways, what happens is these groups get beaten back. The Al-Nusra Front, which became HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Shams, they basically started this salvation government in the northwest corner of Syria and just kind of lived there and existed there for a while. So they used to be Al-Qaeda. The guy in charge of the interim government, al-Shara, he used to be called Abu al-Jolani when he was Al-Qaeda. Now he's kind of had this media rehabilitation where he actually makes himself look like Zelensky, to literally physically look like Zelensky, to be accepted by a Western audience. And they launched an offensive the day after Hezbollah signed a ceasefire with Israel. Because one of the things that they were scared of, they were terrified of Hezbollah, because, Hezbollah wrecked the Islamic State and wrecked Al-Qaeda during the Syrian civil war. They literally were one of the reasons that the Islamic State was defeated so quickly. It was because of Hezbollah. So of course, Hezbollah has its own problems and stuff, but they did that. So they were terrified of Hezbollah. Once Hezbollah was done fighting Israel, that's when they decided to attack. And the original plan of attack was just to take the northern city of Aleppo. Turkey has always wanted Aleppo. They've had some alliances with Turkey in the past. There's this thrust to expand Turkey within this like neo-Ottoman vision that some politicians have. But anyways, they just expected to get to Aleppo, but there was no resistance from the government or the army when they got to Aleppo. So they're just like, okay, now we're just going to keep going, I guess. So they got the Homs, and then they finally got to Damascus. And now they're just like, I guess we have to be a government now. And one of the problems is everybody was happy that Assad was gone. And that's a testament. Nobody in the army fought for him. Literally, nobody wanted to fight for him. It's just like how nobody in the Afghan National Army wanted to fight for the Afghan government that we installed, that we propped up, that was deeply corrupt. And so they're just like, all right, Taliban, come on in. We don't give a shit anymore. So it was very Afghanistan to me.
So Assad was bad, but it's not like the people a month ago wanted this HTS and al-Jolani. I mean, it's so crazy. The dude's changed his name. The organization's changed his name. I feel like that's part of the confusion act. But what you're saying is Assad was bad, but it's not like the people wanted this guy in. Like, to me,
a lot of minorities do not want him in, because I think he's more of like all he wants is political power. That's why he joined Al-Qaeda. That's why he reformed himself to be more like secular and moderate. Yeah. So he's ideologically flexible. However, the problem is, and why we're seeing so much violence happen in the coast, and why we're seeing the ethnic cleansing of Alawite minorities, is because he may have reformed, but his fighters, there are still militias that were like Al-Qaeda a couple years ago. And they didn't all of a sudden be like, you know what, maybe we should stop chopping people's heads off. No. And so he's kind of beholden to these extremist jihadists in his ranks. And they're not just Syrians. There's foreign fighters from China, Algeria, Egypt, just the most radical people who just came to Syria to just kill people. That's what are part of his militia. So even if he's reformed, the guys on the ground, which he can't control, are just running around the countryside.
Yeah. Just
killing
killers.
allies. Yeah.
What do you think the United States and Israel were the support structure behind him to allow him to overthrow Assad that easily?
Well, you see, Assad was, again, deeply corrupt. He
Yeah.
basically hoarded all of Syria's wealth while the US was doing a maximum pressure sanctions campaign against Syria. So the economy was being choked by him, his cronies, and his like multi millionaire business buddies, and the full pressure sanctions from the West on Syria. So they really didn't have a chance. And so how US sanctions work
Yeah.
is we try to starve a country out to start a popular uprising against a government we don't like. So literally, US sanctions against Russia, against Iran, is to make life so unlivable for the local population. And this is what the CIA will never tell you, but this is what sanctions are essentially. So unlivable that the people blame the government, they uprise, and they overthrow the government. So insofar as that happened with the maximum pressure campaign in Syria, yeah, the US was behind it. Now, do I think there's an intelligence back channel to Al Jolani? Maybe. I'll just say this as a former special operations guy who has kind of a background in military intelligence stuff. It's weird that he was captured in 2006 when he was a lieutenant in Al Qaeda under Zarqawi by U.S. Special Operations Forces. He was captured by U.S. Special Operations Force in 2006,
Yeah.
and he was released in 2011 when the Syrian civil war kicked off.
Yeah.
Kind of sus to me, but there's nothing proving it. I can't prove what's going on with that, but it's kind of weird, guys.
Yeah, that's a Homeland Claire Danes asset right there, in my opinion. Really quick, I should have asked you this at the beginning. Do you mind just giving everybody your military background a little bit? Because I think that's definitely, makes you unique.
Yeah, I'm a former U.S. Army Ranger. I did 4 combat deployments to Afghanistan and Joint Special Operations Command. I started off as like a primary assault team leader, and then I started to branch more into human intelligence collection. So there's different types of intelligence, and you usually specialize in one thing. So there's signal intelligence, phones, radios, transmissions. There's technological intelligence and cryptography. Human intelligence, I collected information from humans, generally through field interrogations and talking with some sources.
Got it. Okay. All right. Let's get into the area that I wanted you to really drop knowledge bombs on us. And that is talking about the difference between a leftist and a liberal when it comes to the Democratic Party. Because I'll be totally honest, man, and we kind of had a little back and forth on Instagram one time. I speak for Joe Q Public, and in Joe Q Public's mind, I think when they hear left, they think Democrats, they think liberals, they think leftist. All of those terms are really interchangeable, and it comes down to left versus right, Democrat versus Republican. But what I've learned from you is there's real differences there. You consider yourself a leftist. You don't consider yourself a liberal Democrat. So help us understand the differences, the ideologies, and then let's name some names so people can really, really clarify who is who.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I'll start by saying this. As a leftist, I'm just going to preface this whole conversation with, I usually, in the amount of hate and the amount of fighting I do, is not with conservatives. It's with liberals. From our perspective, the Democratic Party is a right-wing party. Yeah. So, no, it's going to seem kind of crazy. Look, I'll just say this also, like, liberals accuse conservatives and actual leftists of this horseshoe theory, where the liberals are here at the top of the horseshoe. And if you go further right and further left, they start to get kind of close together. So like there's this saying amongst the left, as you go far enough left, you get your guns back. So yeah, and we also share a lot of things about social issues, have a big problem with the government.
All right, so let's get some names so people can really understand it. Biden, Kamala Harris, liberal. Okay. Nancy Pelosi.
There has never been an actual left-wing candidate that was a president. So if you actually want to go to like the closest thing we've had to a left candidate would be Bernie Sanders.
Okay, yeah. So do you consider Bernie, AOC, I don't know, does the squad fall into left?
Mm-mm.
No. Okay.
AOC is definitely not left. She's actually kind of dangerous from our perspective because she pretends to be progressive.
Yeah.
So she kind of fools people into being progressive, but she's actually DNC establishment. She wants to be president. She will always sell the working class under the bus at the end of the day in order to achieve her political ends and serve her corporate master.
Okay. Okay. What about people like Jon Stewart? What is he to you?
I think his politics have always been pretty left wing.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, his criticism of the Democratic Party, why their loathing and contempt for the working class, their elitism, he's always criticized that.
Okay. Okay. And then the liberal side, I mean, does Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, Pelosi, all of those guys, right? All of those uniparty Democratic politicians, those are liberals, and those, in your eyes, are as bad or worse than conservatives?
Worse, because from our perspective, the Democratic Party does not exist to defeat Republicans. They exist to block actual progressive left candidates from access to political power. So let me give you an example. During this last election, the entire time, like everybody on the progressive left, which they call the far left, I don't know, they can't define what the far left is. They're like, because they're the ones with all these culture war issues. They're the ones that need to have like gender neutral bathrooms. It's like, I don't give a fuck about that, dude. Like people can't live anymore. Like, so liberals are the ones who introduced this. And they started in 2016 to defeat Bernie Sanders. You know, when Hillary Clinton literally got up on stage and she said, could we regulate the banks, stop these predatory loans and really take it to these corporatists? But will that end racism? Will that end misogyny? It's like, just regulate the freaking banks, dude. Why, so the entire DNC did this massive propaganda push where if you don't vote for Hillary Clinton, you're a misogynist, even though Bernie Sanders is like, yo, I'm going to back workers unions, we're going to try to get single payer healthcare through. But if you wanted that, you're a misogynist and you hate women. So this is like, they're the origin of the culture war issues, and it's made to fragment any actual progressive movements over these like identity politics things. So this is where like leftists and conservatives also come together. Like, we don't care about that shit, dude. Like, it exists to divide Americans and divide the working class so they don't hold their leadership accountable.
I totally agree with that. So, the Bernie thing's interesting. I went back and looked at the 2016 election where they totally turned on him. And then the 2020 election, there's a great documentary called Bernie's Blackout. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Vice TV put it out, and I'm not a crazy fan of everything Vice does, but it showed how right before COVID launched, and I definitely consider COVID a launch, right before that, it showed how the media was blacking Bernie Sanders out because he was so far ahead of Biden because they didn't think Bernie could beat Trump. And so they completely blacked Bernie out of the media and started their plan. And then many people think that that wasn't enough. And then that's what launched the whole COVID initiative to shut everything down so they could basically do what they did. So anyway, if you haven't seen that, I think you'd enjoy watching Bernie's Blackout.
Yeah, I've heard a bunch of stories. I was talking to a DNC operative, like political operative for the Democratic National Committee. And he literally said that, we didn't support Biden because he was the only one that could defeat Trump, actually. We supported Biden because he was the only one that could defeat Bernie. Yeah. Because they do not want progressive, like, economic reform.
Yeah.
In the Democratic Party. They don't.
Okay.
So Bernie was like the biggest threat. They don't want workers' unions. They would take away the 5-day work week, and make it 6 if they could. Yeah. So
is there any other current Democrat that you really like, or that is part of the progressive movement besides Bernie? I thought AOC was, but now I realize she's not.
No, again, she's controlled opposition.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
And this is why we actually consider, in terms of political change, Democrats to be the bigger threat, because they'll promise all this reform and then literally do nothing. So I don't care where you stand on the abortion issue. Yeah. But let's just take the abortion issue, where Obama promised to codify Roe v. Wade, right? The first term he was elected, he promised to do that, and he had a super majority. He had the White House, a bunch, pretty liberal Supreme Court justices. He had a supermajority in the House and the Senate. Within his first 100 days, He said, yeah, that's not on the policy agenda. And here's why. They never codified Roe v. Wade because they needed it as a threat to raise money for the Democratic Party. Because Democrats don't really have a policy platform. All they have is but Republicans, right? So like, how could they raise money from all these like liberal coastal people if Roe v. Wade is not under constant threat? And now that Roe v. Wade's done, they need another issue.
That's a great take, man. That's a great take. The Roe v. Wade sticking around for political reasons. That's an amazing take. I love that. Okay.
Yeah, well, that's the leftist perspective on the Democratic Party. Like they will always threaten you with like what they call fascism, which I do agree. Personally, I do think that Trump, based just on history and how fascism is defined, you have the merging of oligarchic and corporate power to serve private interests.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, that's our perspective on it. If it really was fascism and they really did believe it, I just wish they'd take this quote unquote fascist takeover of our government like it was a pro-Palestine student protest, because those motherfuckers went super hard on us when we on those 120-pound liberal arts students protesting against the genocide.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're basically they're a non-party. And now what they're trying to do, and what they've been trying to do since 2016, and it hasn't worked for them, is go for moderate Republicans who are disaffected by Trump. Chuck Schumer said on C-SPAN on 2016 during Hillary's failed campaign, and they haven't updated the strategy at all. He said, quote, "For every blue-collar, working-class Democratic voter that we lose in Western Pennsylvania, we will gain 2 to 3 college-educated Republicans." How's that been working out? How's that strategy been working out? No one's going to go for Republican light. They're just going to go for Republicans.
Yeah.
It's because the Democrats love to lose, and I'm not sure they want to win.
Yeah. Who do you like? Any of the Republicans right now? Do you like? I mean, I'll tell you, the two guys I like are Thomas Massie and Rand Paul. That's really about it.
Yeah,
I like those guys.
I mean, I disagree with some of their policies, but I respect that they've been morally consistent their entire career. I also like how Thomas Massie has taken zero money from foreign lobbyists.
Yeah. I think that's insane. And the fact that Trump now is going after Thomas Massie, and he's the only Republican who's taken $0, especially from AIPAC. You know, it's pretty obvious what's going on with Trump and the administration. I am curious if the average MAGA voter eventually, sooner versus later, is going to wake up and see it. Like, I don't know, man. I feel a little divide happening in the Republican Party. I see a lot of people online questioning, the stuff he's doing with Gaza is insane. Maybe they're okay with ending the Ukraine-Russia war, but the stuff he's talking about doing with Gaza and turning it into a Trump resort and all that, I think people are like, wait a minute, what is this all about? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think there was a promise that he was going to take it to the globalists, and it was going to be America first. And now apparently he's given the Panama Canal to BlackRock. Now we apparently need to own Greenland so Elon Musk can get access to like lithium and rare earth minerals, and now we're going to build up Gaza with U.S. tax money. Like, where do you think the money's going to come from? Trump's like, no, they're going to pay for it. Jordan's going to pay for it. Egypt's going to pay for it. They're half a world in debt to the IMF and the World Bank. Their economies are on the verge of collapse. Who's paying for it? It's going to be the American taxpayer. So he could subsidize his own new Dubai with American taxpayer money and then become what he is. He is a landlord. He builds properties and then makes money off those properties. So, yeah, he'd build up Gaza, turn it into Trump land. Of course, that's not going to happen. It's actually impossible. But that's for a completely different set of reasons. But it turns out that he is a globalist. He's offering golden visas to people with foreigners with $5 million of disposable income, which means they have way more than $5 million. So what are they going to do? They're going to go to Miami and San Diego, buy up a bunch of property, and extort working class Americans for rent. Like, this is his landlord globalist class coming to America to screw us all over. And some MAGA people are starting to be like, wait a second, something's not right.
Yeah. Let me throw out a couple names and just give me your take. Tucker Carlson.
I think that he's got a pretty good take on Gaza and some of the Russia-Ukraine stuff. Don't like his domestic policy. I fundamentally disagree with a lot of Republicans because I don't believe this is a leftist perspective. I don't think the cops and the police are actually here to protect Americans. They exist to protect private property, so like company property, which is different from your house, which is personal property. They exist to protect private property, to union bust, scab defense, protect non-union workers from union workers, and to basically exist in case of a popular uprising or counterinsurgency exists. So they're getting more and more concerned about this. That's why we've seen the insane militarization of the police force. Yeah. And it's also why cops, just like basic cops in the places like Nassau County and Long Island, starting salaries $120,000. Pay the cops this much because they want the cops to follow orders and be class traders and union bust and protect Tesla factories for protesters. So this is why I can never get down with a conservative politician, because they're always like, back the blue. But I'm like, the blue is not here to back us, man. They're here to protect you guys. So that's a left perspective.
All right. Interesting.
Yeah. And that's where we also fight with liberals, because liberals want to fund the police more prisons, less social support networks for struggling people, struggling Americans. So,
okay. All right. You know what? You are really helping me understand that liberals and really Republicans or conservative Republicans, you know, are probably more alike than they want us to realize they're more alike.
Yeah. So the big difference is, you know, U.S. foreign policy doesn't really change too much between liberals and Democrats. Or sorry, Democrats and Republicans, right? Okay, Obama carried on Bush's war in Iraq and Afghanistan and actually escalated it, for example. And then, of course, Trump came in. His first term, he said he was like going to be an anti-war candidate. Well, he dropped more ordnance on Afghanistan than anybody else and got involved in Syria, did a bunch of other stuff. So it's basically just carrying on one policy after another. And the main differences between the Republican and Democrats are like cosmetic. I wouldn't call like abortion a cosmetic issue. I wouldn't call the trans stuff an abortion issue, but it's a lot of social issues that don't really affect the economics of working class Americans.
I gotcha.
So they'll do stuff like tax cuts for the rich, deregulation. Republicans want way more of it, but the Democrats still do the same thing. Let's see, funding the police, expanding the prison industrial complex. Like these are all things that the liberals and conservatives support, which is why we call the Democratic Party a right-wing party. They're or like center right, where instead of being actually right.
That is fascinating. All right. The military industrial complex concept. I mean, I really do believe in that. And I think that's existed since Eisenhower, you know, brought that to a speech. I feel like you agree with that, right? Do you think that mechanism absolutely exists?
Well, I actually think it's worse than just that. We call it here on the left the MIMAC, the military industrial academic and media complex.
Wow.
So basically, the media exists to create war hysteria, to manufacture consent for wars. Like, when has that never happened, right? And then the academic complex, like think tanks that advise policymakers, they are like funded by Boeing and Raytheon, like the Atlantic Council, Brookings Institute, like Rand Corporation that advises these policies. Are all very pro-war because they're funded by the military-industrial complex. And then people who sit on the board of Boeing and Raytheon also sit on the board of these media corporations as well, because these uber rich people who sit on boards are in multiple sectors, you know, so you may be on the board of like an oil company and also General Dynamics, right? So it's all this one big complex. It's not just the military industrial complex. It's the legacy mainstream media and these Washington academic think tanks that manufacture consent so that the military industrial complex can wash money out of the public sector, which is taxpayer money, into the private sector, and we never see it again. It goes into $20 million Christmas bonuses for CEOs of Boeing, Raytheon, and General Dynamics.
Yeah, no shit. You sounded like Julian Assange right there. You absolutely sounded like Julian Assange.
Yeah.
Whom, by the way, what thoughts on him, Julian Assange? What do you think?
I mean, WikiLeaks has been an indispensable tool for being an informed public. So 100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about you? I talked about this the other day. You know, the whole Gaddafi, Libya, Benghazi, Hillary Clinton, all that. You have a quick take on that?
Gaddafi had to die. He had to die because he was trying to de-dollarize and break U.S. hegemony in North Africa.
Got it. Yep. Okay. With the dinar, backing it with gold, bring together the Pan-African countries, have their own currency, get off of the petrodollar and stop relying on that. Yeah, dude, I feel that same way. Okay.
Yeah, and because, and he tried to do it before BRICS was doing it. Like we can't overthrow China, Russia, India, Brazil for trying to de-dollarize. But he was just going at it alone. So sending NGOs funded by USAID to foment revolution against Gaddafi, smear him as a dictator in the Western media, and manufacture consent for a regime change war. Hillary has a regime change war kink. She's one of the worst people that's ever existed. But yeah, if you ever talk to Libyans or people from North Africa, everybody loved Gaddafi.
Yeah, I know.
No one considered him to be a dictator.
Yeah. Do you think that same regime change plan was what they implemented with Saddam Hussein? I mean, maybe Osama bin Laden to an extent, but I think he was used as a scapegoat for 9/11. But it's like that U.S. regime change, which like General Wesley Clark has talked about. So many people have talked about that. It seems like there really is a formula to that. And so Saddam fell under that. Gaddafi fell under that. Maybe Bashar al-Assad fell under that. Although again, I think Assad was a bad dude, but was he bad for the reasons we're told he's bad? Like all that stuff kind of fits that plan, huh?
Yeah. So Saddam, I mean, he never should have been overthrown. Like we wouldn't have the Islamic State. We wouldn't have this completely destabilized Middle East. But of course, Saddam had a very powerful military that could challenge Israel. The Iraqi military before we invaded could absolutely have overwhelmed the IDF. The only thing that Israel had that could defeat Iraq was nukes, which they don't have,
Yeah.
So they needed to go and this is why Israel hates Iran so much, because they're the only regional power that can challenge their complete hegemony in the region. Sorry,
Yeah.
Saddam had to go. So Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israel lobby, really was one of the main driving factors for the war in Iraq.
Yeah.
And so after Iraq needed to go, then Iran was next on the target list. And of course, the Iranian government didn't give a shit that Saddam was gone. They hated him. They fought a war in the 80s where millions of people died. And, Iran didn't want Saddam on their border because Iran has this massive unsecurable border against Iraq. And they weren't as powerful militarily as the Iraqi army was at the time. But so while at one time they supported the U.S. in Iraq, overthrowing Saddam, they knew that they were next. So that's when they started to get involved in the war by like giving them IED technology, by funding sectarian militias in Iraq to bog us down so much that we couldn't invade them because they knew that they were next. So that never would have happened. This whole axis of resistance with like Hezbollah connected to Kataib Hezbollah and the popular militarization units in Iraq to like these other groups in Syria to the Yemen. Iran made this axis of resistance in order to not be destroyed, essentially, because they knew the Brookings Institute was putting out position papers on how to invade Iran and how that could happen back in 2009, even before that. So it was a lot of it was, survival. I mean, I'm not a fan of the Iranian government, but I know what they did, why they did. We've been the most destabilizing. And what I mean by we is the U.S. and Israel, because I see Israel as our little colony that also controls us.
Yeah. I mean, do you think the U.S. controls Israel or Israel controls the U.S.?
It's a symbiotic relationship.
Okay.
Because first of all, it's just capitalism.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
They get paid, we get paid. Our defense sectors and high tech sectors are completely intertwined as well. It's not just because foreign lobbies petition our politicians, and it's not just because they've got blackmail on a couple Democrats and Republicans, probably more than a couple.
Yeah.
It's our this entire complex, this capitalist complex that we've created over generations in our relationship with Israel is so deeply intertwined.
Yeah, yeah, it absolutely is. All right, let me ask you on some topics. If you have a take, give it. If you don't, we'll move on. Epstein files.
They'll never be released.
Okay. I agree with you. Netanyahu, give us your take on Netanyahu.
He is the Houdini of politics. Whatever mess he gets into, he can get himself out of it. I don't think he's going to go anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah,
but hopefully he dies of prostate cancer, because apparently he's got that.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, let's hope that does happen. What about, you think like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and this whole, make America healthy again? Like, is this something that has legs to it? Is that somebody I don't know. He's not considered, when he was a Democrat, he wouldn't have been under the left progressive side, would he?
Not even close.
Not even close. Yeah. Okay.
No, we did have some things he liked, but I don't know, man. I didn't like having to get COVID vaccines, but other vaccines, like for measles,
yeah,
kind of irresponsible that you're out there using your platform saying that vaccine. We still want to believe in science.
Yeah,
of course. Okay. Like, I don't trust big pharma with their Pfizer and Moderna shots at the end, like the beginning of COVID. But like polio vaccines are probably something our kids should have.
Yeah, no, I feel you on that. What are your thoughts on Putin and Zelensky and the Ukraine-Russia war in general?
Well, it's a war that never needed to happen. There's this narrative about Russian imperialism, but they wanted to reconstruct the USSR. It's like, first of all, dude, Russia is a capitalist system now. They're not going back to freaking socialism. All right. Second of all, that's not how they forward their interests. They believe much more in like soft power, and also like clandestine or kind of under the books military agreements. That's why they've got Wagner Group in Mali and the Sahel, and that's why they had a few bases in Syria. But like, invasion is not something they really do. It's not something they even did like really that much when they were the USSR, right?
Okay, yeah.
So it was very much provoked by NATO expansionism.
Okay.
And,
all right. I feel that same way. I listen to Professor Jeffrey Sachs a lot and John Mearsheimer. I don't know if you listen to those guys or like those guys, but the whole concept of NATO expansionism being what really is the driving force to this. To me, it really does line up, and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I'm not a fan of Putin or how he does things, but
yeah. Okay.
That doesn't mean like you have to keeping great power politics come into play, right? I don't like how, like, when it comes to Russia, Ukraine, people either like simp for Zelensky or simp for Putin. It's like, they're politicians, man.
Yeah,
they got to the place they're at because their values are like fungible. I will say that Putin's a master statesman.
Yeah,
but this is great power politics. All these countries have their own interests, and Russia couldn't, based off that principle, just allow NATO intelligence posts to be built along its border with Ukraine. Like, if Russia did that in Mexico, I think we'd be fighting.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great analogy. If Mexico or Canada, if Russia or China kind of try to get those guys on their team, we'd go crazy. We'd go absolutely crazy. All right, what else? Anything else, man? Anything else you want to talk about?
Let me see. I could go on for a while.
No, I know you can. When people talk about the deep state, the whole concept of the deep state and all that, like, what is that to you? And again, if you feel like name names, because I always feel that makes it more relatable. But if not, what is that to you?
Okay, it's a combination of things. The deep state is basically bureaucrats that have been in place since, like, I don't know, I was talking to a guy at the CIA that was at the CIA, and he was like, dude, there's like old freaking fossils that have been at the CIA crafting policy since the Bay of Pigs. Like, what? So it's kind of that, but I don't know. This is where I'm going to get super lefty. The deep state's capitalism. What controls What controls our government are the corporations that lobby our politicians. And I think the last vestige of democracy died during the Citizens United case, where, the Supreme Court ruled that corporations are people and private individuals. And since they're people, they can give however much money to political campaigns. So I don't know, when Trump talks about the deep state, they're going to slash the deep state. From my perspective, I was like, dude, you are the deep state.
You are
You're
the
drain
deep
the
state.
swamp.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
are the swamp. Like,
yeah.
all of these
maybe a different swamp, or you think the same swamp? Like, do you think Trump and Biden are the same swamp, the same deep state?
Okay, so here's the difference. I kind of don't exactly believe in the uniparty theory. I'd say rather they're two wings of the same bird.
Okay.
But it's a slight distinction, but no, because the DNC is the coastal corporate elite, the Fortune 500 company leaders, the donor class, what we call them. But now what you're seeing is the Republicans are the techno-feudal oligarchs on one side. And so they're like the same class in some ways. They're of uber rich, uber wealthy people, but they have different visions for how the country should go. However, what they will never do, and what they will always agree on, is stamping down on public unrest and the working class. So if you look at this position paper put out by the DNC about what they need to do, it's called the Third Way Comeback Retreat. So you know how the Heritage Foundation that crafted Project 2025 is a conservative, I would call it uber conservative think tank that advises and crafts GOP policy, right? So can I actually share this on screen?
You know what? I don't know.
I got it.
Does it work?
Yes. So Third Way.
Oh, this is amazing. I love that.
Yeah. So the Third Way is a DNC think tank that crafts policy for the DNC. And when I read this to you and I say that Republicans are going to tax cuts for the rich, repeal worker protection, the Democrats are going to do the same thing too. So in early February 2025, Third Way gathered a group of highly experienced and passionate political professionals over 1.5 days to begin to chart the Democratic comeback. And if you read this, basically what you are going to see is they're not trying to fight Republicans. They're trying to fight people on the left. So if you look at this point 5 of the takeaway sheet, fear of dissent within the party. Democrats are perceived as intolerant of internal debate, where questioning progressive orthodoxy results in backlash rather than open discussion. Candidates and operatives need to feel more comfortable just saying no to activist groups and unpalatable far-left ideas. You mean the far-left idea of taxpayer money going to actually American taxpayers?
Yeah.
Like actually fucking building roads instead of sending fucking 90 billion to Ukraine? Yeah, far-left ideas. And of course, like the Democratic Party really supported the war in Ukraine as well. So
yeah, they really did. It's crazy how the Democratic Party is all in on Ukraine. The Republican Party's all in on Israel when it comes to spending taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, and here, look, all of this is about fighting the far left. Point 7, allowing the far left to define the party. Basically, what they mean by people on the far left, people who want socialist reforms like single payer healthcare. So they don't want that because of course their donors make a lot of money off the healthcare system. So activist groups and progressive staffers push unpopular cultural positions, making it seem like Democrats are more extreme than they actually are. Operatives and campaigns must remember that activist groups exist to promote their single issue and raise money around it, not make Democrats electable. Well, we told them, everyone on the pro-Palestine side, we're like, hey, you guys are going to lose to Trump unless you stop doing a genocide. And they're like, you guys are radical. It was like, dude, just stop killing kids, man. So, and they're like, you guys are only single issue voters. And I'm like, really, dude, I'm a single issue voter? Because I can track the supply chain from coltan and the Congo going to put guidance packages into JDAM bombs that are getting dropped on Gaza. And the same system that's doing that is the same reason you can't make rent this month. So yeah, dude, single issue voters for sure. And here's the big kicker. I'm only going to read one more, but this entire sheet is an assault on progressive reform from the Democrats and the working class. Democrats are seen as hostile to success. indifferent to people's desire to attain wealth, while reflexively attacking wealthy business leaders instead of promoting economic mobility and aspiration. It's basically just like a class defense of corporatists.
Got it. Got it. So that's like a liberal think tank that's comparable to the Heritage Foundation with their Project 2025. That's almost like the liberal version of Project 2025 that's trying to, I guess, weaken the lefty progressives.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Gotcha.
Because again, they're there to protect their wealth.
No, I get it, dude. I get it. I think you're totally on with that. You know, the analogy of two wings of the same bird. I've said two heads of the same snake because I think snake adds a villainous touch to it. But you're
the United Snakes of America.
Yeah, exactly. All right. What do you think is going to happen the next year? Do you think that, you know, things are going to get? It's going to be a fucking shit show, man.
Well,
it's going to be a shit show.
The stock markets are incredibly volatile. They're crashing.
Yeah.
Trump was straight up asked point blank by a reporter, is there going to be a recession? And the subtext was, yeah, there's going to be a recession.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to look for that. There's going to be more civil unrest. As life becomes more and more unlivable for Americans, prices aren't going down. From my perspective, the Trump administration and all the oligarchs that he has surrounded, the tech bro oligarchs that he's surrounded himself with, are basically there to plunder the U.S. government, slash it, take what they can, and get as rich as possible off of us.
That's wild, man. That's wild because honestly, that's exactly what they said the Biden administration was doing. And they're literally seemingly doing the same. That's crazy.
It's funny that, you know, Elon Musk talks about saving a few $1 billion by slashing all these regulatory bodies that were investigating like SpaceX for, you know.
Yeah.
I forget what their investigation was, but malfeasance essentially. So slash that regulatory agency. If he wanted to save the American taxpayers money, he could just not take billions and billions of dollars of taxpayer money to subsidize Tesla and SpaceX and all his other business ventures, because he's already the richest man on earth, right? So all of these oligarchs are like, you know, socialism. It's like you literally are doing socialism when you use taxpayer money to fund your business. That's socialism. But we can't have single payer healthcare. Come on, dude. The hypocrisy is so insane. And this is where I align more with the non-MAGA right than I do with liberals.
Okay.
As a leftist.
I got you. Well, listen, this has been great, man. I know you're pressed for time, so I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I really do think it's healthy for everybody to understand the difference between leftist and liberal, especially within the Democratic Party, and realize it's not one united front.
In fact, we despise each other. And one more point on this before, I don't want to forget this. This is a really important point. Republican politicians will call both leftists and liberals the left, like the far left. You're right.
Yeah.
Even though there's a faction, because they know that you think liberals are the actual left, and why would you talk to liberals? So they call us all one thing, even though we hate each other, so that we never have these kind of conversations.
I think you're right about that. And I think that's why there's the confusion. They want to group everyone on the non-Republican side as, again, in their eyes. Exactly. Exactly. No, I agree with you. All right, man, listen, stay on the line. All right, everybody. I hope you guys learned something. I definitely did. We'll bring Greg back on and dive into some more deeper stuff. I asked Greg on purpose dude is so intelligent. I said, hey, let's dumb it down this episode, but we'll bring him back to do some good stuff. All right, hold on the line.
This episode was brought to you by the new book, Deep Shallow Dive Into You, available now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble in hardcover and paperback. Don't forget to sign up for our new mailing list on our website at deepshallowdive.com.